And really, I don't know how I can use my DP to improve this. Yes. I don't know a way how I can use DP to do that. So one suggestion is that you gave is generate all shortest path, and then well, probably do something like ranking and selection, which makes sense. The problem then is that if you do that you probably have too many routes to choose from. So what would then, if you think about simulation optimization, if you have many solutions, what would then be a possibility?
You can select first. You just maybe select not select the shortest expected path, not the shortest path with an expectation plus one standard deviation or something like that. So,
yeah.
Take into account the variability.
Yeah, you could somehow take into account the variability, but still you have to decide if my current route is ABDF, and what is, I mean, the option of first selecting a number of routes and then somehow doing this calculation is not really an option, because there are too many routes for that. The algorithms that we discussed for solving the shortest path is not really an option, because I don't know how to extend DP to do this. I don't know how to extend Dijkstra to do this. Yeah. So if you think back about it, you're looking back into the slides, which of course makes sense. So if you think back of the simulation optimization course 2 weeks ago, there was ranking and selection if you have a limited set of possibilities, and then there was local search if you have a larger set of possibilities, possible solutions. And then, of course, you have to think, okay, now I have ABDF, so how can I change by changing one arc? Of course, then I end up in a different place, so then I have to think, okay, if I change one arc, what is then the remaining arc? Okay, there are multiple options for that, and perhaps you should start with, perhaps you should do something where you have from every location you can you have the path to the destination, and then, for example, if your path from A to F is ABDF, and then you do local search. Then, for example, you take out one arc, yes, and from the city where you end up, for example, you take out BD, and then you want to add, let's say, BE, and then, well, you have to know that from E you can get to F. That's part of all the ways you can get to F, and then you can simulate a new one, and then see if it's better, and if it's not better, then you keep the old one, and if it's better, then you take the new one, and from there. But the idea was, and therefore I only ask you to describe it, that you come up with some kind of an algorithm that does such. But again, this is all of a sudden much more difficult than this, and perhaps if you really dive into the scientific literature, you might even find the paper doing this. But as far as I know, I'm not aware of that. So that's at least not part of the standard textbooks. So that was the first exercise. The second exercise, which is somewhat more involved, because now you have these this stochasticity. But I already indicated on the blackboard last week how you could solve this, and I understood that most of you managed to do that. So that's, I think that's quite good. Then the big question was simulate the demands. And what is the thing about that? So you have well, again, there are multiple ways to draw it. Actually, I prefer to make a drawing like this. But again, so here the blue one is. Let's try the green one. That looks better. So here there's time. Here there is the remaining capacity. And then you could compute the value function here. You could compute, and then you either go here or there. And then what you typically find in this problem is there is a region, if you have where you say, and I have to add there is a region where you only sell ticket 1, yes, and there is a region where you sell 1 and 2. Now there are multiple effects, and that's also typical in airlines. And there's one effect that if you are close to the departure date, even if you have lots of capacity, then you prefer only to sell type 1. Yeah, why is that? I'm sorry?
Higher demand.
Yeah, the higher demand, there's higher demand of type 1. And that means that you prefer the expected reward of only type 1 instead of the expected reward of both types, but for the low price. So close to departure, yes, very close to departure, it's better. Even if you have lots of seats free, it's better to only offer the expensive price. So that means that you keep an empty plane, but at least the people who booked at the last time, they pay a high price. Yeah. Actually, in many revenue management systems, this doesn't work well. That's one of the reasons why sometimes if flights on many airlines, if you're close to the departure date and it's not, the flights are not fully booked, then prices go down. Yeah, and that's not always optimal. That's simply because many of the older systems they assume that you're booking your own costs. So that's really an issue. I know this is an issue at Emirates. I know that KLM has some workarounds to put it. So that means that that here you only have, here you do only one. Only one. So here, this is like the departure date. And then you get something which is roughly like this. Yes, if you're close to, if you have little capacity left, and you're, but if you're close to the departure date, then of course you sell only one because that's because of the limited capacity. While if it still takes lots of time to sell these expensive seats, you also want to do it. That doesn't mean. So this is if you look at the value function and you would look at what are my optimizing actions. I didn't ask you to do that. I asked you just determine the total expected revenue. So I'm actually only interested in this number. And this number here, in V1C, but you have to do the whole recursion to get there. But if you would look at what are my maximizing actions, then you find ones and 1 and 2s, the 2 possible actions, and then you find something like this. And so there are some volatility. However, what does a typical flight do? And that's, of course, the simulation. And every time you simulate, you see something different. So typically, at the flight, well, you start here, yes, at type 1 or 0 and with full capacity. And then, well, and then it's, of course, randomness that kicks in. So here you have to determine what is my demand. And if their demand occurs, well, then you typically, well, it's always decreasing, of course, because you cannot, we didn't assume that there are cancellations, which can happen in certain situations, certainly in hotels, lots of cancellation. If you book through booking.com, usually it's, and you can cancel up until 24 or 48 hours in advance. So what's many cancellations, in airlines less. And then at some point, it might happen that you cross this line. And then all of a sudden, then you only sell booking class 1. But now, of course, the sales go less quickly. Yes, because the price is higher. And perhaps you hit again this line. Yes? And then you're here, and all of a sudden, you open again a cheap class. And then you might do this. So what you see in airlines, of course, they have usually more than 2 classes, but what you can see is fluctuations in price going up and prices going down. Yes? And that has to do with the red line, which is actually the simulation of the booking price. And then you end up, well, I don't know, perhaps somewhere here, or perhaps you're completely sold out here, and then, of course, use that. Okay, so this is a typical simulation. And I did this here. Let's see. So here, there's actually a simulation where it doesn't. Here, it looks like here it's low price, high price, low price, high price, low, high. Yeah, that doesn't always happen like this. Here, let's see. Here, for example, you see one spike. So here, high price, low price, high price, and then you stay. I think it's time is reversed actually. So that's a bit stupid because I start here with and so this is you start at the low price and then so that's. Again, I should have turned it and put time horizontal, then I could have made a nicer plot. I'm sorry about that. But because I turned it around, and here actually you see the optimal, the graph with the optimal. Yeah, but here you see that you start low and then high, low, and then you end up high. Here you see some more fluctuations, and then indeed you end. I think the message is clear. So this kind of explains also why you can see in airlines this weird booking behavior. And then, of course, you have these websites that try to outwit the system, who try to learn when prices go up and down. And then you have these prices, sometimes these advisors, you should buy your tickets right now, you can wait, yes.
So something I really helped understand in the beginning. You basically added the probability of type 1 and type 2 multiplied by 200, and then we ended up with 180 that we compared afterwards to the probability of getting the type 1.
Yeah, so this is, yeah?
Wow.
Okay, let me explain to you. So I was talking about the very end. So I was talking about the last day. The last day, the demand for type 1 is 40%. So with 1. Yeah, so that increases linearly. The demand for type 2 is 0.5. So at the last day, the probability of demand is 0.9. Yeah, 0.4 type 1, 0.5 type 2. So the total probability of demand is 0.9. So if I sell for 200, at the day before departure, then my probability of my demand is 0.9, and my ticket price is 200.
Why wouldn't we set it for 500?
Well, and so here, customers buy down when type 2 is available. Type 1 customers buy type 2 tickets. So you put on your website, and this airline puts on its website, a ticket costs 200 euros. And now, this customer here says, hey, that's the price I'm willing to pay, I'm buying. And this customer says, hey, I'm willing to buy 500, but I can buy for 200, I'm buying as well. Yeah, so 0.9 probability of buying, 200 is the revenue, so that's 180. My other choice is I put 500 on the website. Then this customer is not buying. This customer is buying. This customer is not buying. This customer is buying. Yeah? And that is 0.4 times 500. And that is 200. Yeah? So that means that, of course, so that means that that this is better. The difference, of course, the difference is not, this is the immediate reward. Yes? You also have what are the consequences for the long term. Here, you lose more capacity. Yeah, because here you lose 0.9 capacity, here you lose 0.4 capacity. Yeah? But here, as I said, I assume it's the end of the, it's the day before departure, so anyway, if I have capacity left, there's no more time to sell any further seats, so this is better anyway. But even if this perhaps 1 or 2 days earlier, then it's just below 0.4, perhaps this one is even better, then you might want to say, well, they use, how to say it. And so if I'm here, let's say here, this one gets higher because the 0.4 is lower earlier in time. Yeah? But because of capacity reasons here, you only sell to type 1. And because if you sell here to type 2, then you lose your capacity, and then you have to say no to these later arrivals of type 1. Yeah? And of course, that's the explanation, the intuition behind it. But the nice thing is that it drops out of this dynamic programming. Are you convinced or still have questions? Okay. Okay. So again, I'll put these. I forgot to do that, but I'll put this Excel sheet online. And again, it would have been nicer if I reversed it. So if I find some time, I'll do that. But at least you know that there is this issue. So as I said, I have a couple of slides. So by the way, the stuff to learn for the exam is the material of the first of the 6 lectures. Yeah? So what we're going to do today is not part, and again I have only a couple of slides, it's not part of the material for the exam. One question are there any questions about the lecture so far that you have? It's something that, I don't know if you already had time to look into the material. 2 weeks is still a long time, so perhaps you didn't think about the exam yet, which is completely understandable. And that you delayed that still a couple of days. But are there any questions right now about the material one of the first 6 lectures? No? If not, then what I would like to do is I want to do 2 things. I did some kind of, and so what we have been doing is looking at different optimization methods. Yes? And then a logical question is, when should I use which method, right? So I looked into the literature for, let's say, the decision tree. When should I do what? And of course, I didn't find anything because all these scientists, they like to dive into one method, but to come up with some kind of a meta theory when to use what, it's not there. So I tried to come up with something, and well, I don't know if it really makes sense, but perhaps pretty obvious. But if you would like to decide what should I use in which situation, well, I do think that these dynamic problems that we discussed in the very end last week, and for which we just discussed the exercises, so I think they are, if you can model it in such a way, then you shouldn't use any different techniques. Yes? So the first question is perhaps, do I have a dynamic problem where I have costs at any point in time, and where my decision, where I can make any time a new decision? Yeah? So, which depend on such a state, where I can formulate something as a state. Again, remember that the state contains all the information, like in this situation, it was the remaining capacity, that was typically the state, and that was all the information I needed to make future actions. Yeah? So if you have such a problem, then you should definitely use this dynamic programming or dynamic optimization framework. Yeah? Then it's important, if that's not the case, then you're somewhere in the other categories. Then you have to think, can I calculate my objective for a certain solution? Yeah, so apparently, because by the way, here the solution space is complicated because the actions that you can take depend on previous actions. Yeah? Here I assume that I can formulate somehow this capital S, this solution space. And then sometimes you can calculate, or often you can calculate the objective or the expected objective. Yes, you can just calculate it, or sometimes you can only simulate it. Now, if you can only simulate it, then we saw we needed the simulation optimization framework. If you can calculate for a given solution its value, then you have to ask yourself, is this a problem with a known algorithm? If yes, then of course apply this algorithm. So think about something like Dijkstra's algorithm. If not, then you have to ask yourself whether you can come up with a linear programming formulation. You should know that there are certain types of nonlinear programming, like quadratic programming, that can also be solved pretty well. We didn't address that. And if that's the case, then you should apply these methods. Again, these ILP methods, these linear programming or that integer linear programming, and that's very efficient. So in general, that works very well. If that is not the case, then you have to ask yourself, that perhaps you are more in the traveling salesman type problems. Can I come up with some local search or some heuristic which gives me at least a reasonably good solution? And if that's not the case, then really, well, then there's not really a method that we discussed the last couple of weeks. Sometimes these methods consist of multiple methods where you have to make multiple decisions. And so sometimes there's some hierarchy in problems. So sometimes you have to make smaller problems of it first and do them one by one, which is often not overall optimal, but which is sometimes a way to do. Yes? We'll encounter, in the problems that we're going to discuss, we will encounter decisions. Okay, so this is like, well, first effort in coming with something like a model which optimizes well, with something like a way to decide which model to use. In practice, people see a problem and then they say, hey, this is integer linear. programming problem and then they apply. So people do not. I'm always surprised to see when you see people outside of science, outside of mathematics, especially how structured they are in problem solving, and then they have like these cause and effect graphs, etc. And I look at mathematicians, of course, when they will try to prove certain properties of their methods, they are very rigorous. But when it comes to how they organize it or how they decide methods, it's usually, well, okay, this works. Yeah, so yeah, I'm always surprised how to say it, how very accurate you can be at proving things, and at the same time very non-systematic when it comes to which method to use or how to organize it. Okay, how does what I have been telling in the big picture? Perhaps you've seen this. Did you see this picture before? No? Okay, so my background is optimization, what we presented, but nowadays this is mostly presented in the bigger picture of business analytics. And while people find operations research and optimization boring, business analytics is a buzzword that is much more popular nowadays. It's to a certain extent popularized by this person here, Davenport, who is like a consultant and telling that companies should be data-driven. And what are typically the steps in becoming data-driven? Well, that is really what you see here. So the lower part is really about business intelligence, and the upper part is about statistics and optimization. And typically, if you have where it comes from, where it starts with is getting your data and getting reports and understanding when things go wrong. So this is more business intelligence, and then what you see here is often called descriptive analytics. So understanding what you see. And then the next step is looking forward. So then you're going to do statistics, and then you're about forecasting and extrapolating, and finally, so this is then the predictive analytics, and this is then the prescriptive analytics, where you want to change the future. And eventually, if you're in a business situation, what you want to do, you want to use your data to improve decisions. Yes, but you can just start and see, hey, I see something in my data, and then on basis of my own feeling or experience, I make a decision. Or you can say, hey, I make the decision based on my predictions, or I can even let the machine make the decision. So, and the idea is, of course, if you use your data and your analytical methods all the way, that you get better decisions. And if you look at these hype curves, then you see prescriptive analytics of one of the things to come. Of course, what I see nowadays in many companies is they're all doing data mining, machine learning, so they're all somewhere here, but it's not always clear what the benefits.
So, how is machine learning and deep learning linked to the optimization field? So does it overlap, or?
Yes, perhaps. And so for me, again, I would say that it is a sequence. Yes. And so, yeah, perhaps I should have added more slides on this. But what people talk about is you have descriptive analytics, and then you have to think. Well, there's a lot of overlap, but perhaps data mining or or data analysis. Yeah. Then you have things like predictive analytics. And then what? You have to think about statistics, but especially inferential statistics, where you make statements about things you haven't observed. But you should also, machine learning should be part of it. And of course, the standard machine learning model is like linear regression. Yes, and deep learning is just nonlinear regression. Yes, so there's nothing. I'm not saying it's not fancy because it's pretty advanced and you need. It's not easy to execute, but if you want to explain it, what you do is you do nonlinear regression. Of course, a linear function of a linear function is again linear, so it makes no sense to have middle layers. Yes, but the nonlinear function of a nonlinear function is different. Nonlinear function, then it makes sense to have these multiple layers. Yeah, so then, and then again, solving a neural network is much harder than solving linear regression. But in a way, of course, linear regression can be extended in many ways. It's very powerful, and definitely is the first thing to do. And many applications where deep learning is not the answer. But of course, this all helps you. This helps you understand the data. This helps you look in the future. But now you want to change the future. So, and I'm going to say a couple of more words about it. But let's say that you need in your, if you want to solve the shortest route to go somewhere, you still need your predictions on the length of the way that you want to go. So there are many situations in where you first want to do your parameter estimation using this before you put all these things in your prescriptive model. And then you have to think about standard optimization as standard about optimization as we presented it. But there are also frameworks which is more for computer science or machine learning if you want, that fit more into the optimization framework. And in my slides I'll say a few words about this. You have something like reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning is basically dynamic programming, but where you have uncertainty, where you learn about your parameters. Yes? You can, for example, I'm walking in a building. I want to know the shortest way out. Then, of course, I can use dynamic programming, right? Because I know that this room through that door leads to that corridor, and from that corridor I can go to that room, to that door, to that to the corridor next to it, etc. So I can use dynamic programming to find my way out of this building. But now suppose that I do not know this building, and then I have to learn how the network looks at the same time that I'm trying to get out. And then you can think of this. Now think of a robot doing this, and then you're basically, well, that's what they call reinforcement learning, but it all starts with dynamic programming, as we discussed it last week. So you will see that of course, if you open machine learning books, start with linear regression. If you open a book on reinforcement learning, it starts with dynamic programming, as discussed. Yeah, but of course, if you want to go further in this, and that requires more time. But at least what we did is the starting point for all this. And again, the starting point is more into the traditional operations research fields. Dating back to the 60s and 70s, in the same way as basic machine learning methods find their roots also in statistical methods, also dating back many decades. Although, of course, the focus is a bit different. If you do linear regression, then you know that the least squares method finds the best solution. Yeah, I was just this weekend for the book of which I have a couple of chapters. I was using some I was executing some neural network, but I put a linear function in it, and it didn't converge for obvious reasons. But there's no guarantee. There's less theory, but much more practical experience in machine learning because the focus is different, and our tooling is different. Of course, the mathematicians of a century ago didn't have fast computers to experiment on their methods. So all they could do was prove nice theorems. It's also a different time. But I definitely you should put it in this framework. On the other hand, sometimes you can integrate machine learning methods in some of the optimization problems that we do. And a very nice example in my that I encountered in my own practice. Remember, if you think about this simulation optimization framework, where you have this enormous state space. Yeah? Now I want to find here the S star for which the S star is the, well, the minimizing I'm sorry, but we called it pi, I think, the solutions here, and then well, I had the reward depended on the solution and also something like this. Yeah. So I want to find the best pi here. Yeah? Now, one of the things we did in ranking and selection was that we simulated all solutions a couple of times. And then we said, if you have local search, then you cannot do that. And then somehow you walk through this space. You can also do something else, which is based on machine learning. You can do something like, okay, I select a couple of these that I simulate. Yes. So this is, now I put this in my machine learning algorithm, whether that's linear regression or some other algorithm. Then I fit the form of this function to it. Yes. So I have, and then I try to find the optimum, which is somewhere here, and then hopefully that's close to my optimum. Right? So these are the things we're doing right now to spend my simulation budget better. So I spend part of my budget on simulating a number of random solutions, then I fit a surface to it using my machine learning method, then using my machine learning, this approximation, whether that's a linear approximation or a non-linear approximation, I don't care. We find, but that can be done very quickly because even if it's a neural network that is very hard to train, as soon as it's trained, it gets very quickly answers, and then find the minimum over this approximation, and that's then well. And then I can try to fit again locally here. I can do more, but then you really integrate statistics. Yeah, so there are lots of methods, and what you see is that people use methods from so my research group is more on optimization, but we have a couple of machine learning specialists because there are lots of connections and ways to improve the things that we try to do. Okay, what is a so here are again these three terms. So descriptive, well, analytics. Here I call statistics. All different terms. So this is about description of data. This is more induction. What we have been doing with modeling, about mathematical modeling, what you very often do there is that you, for example, I think again about the fastest way to go to Utrecht. I can go there 20 days, and then I can, every day, one day it takes me 30 minutes, next day is 30, it takes me 32 minutes, etc. Yeah, so I can get a distribution and say, hey, this is the time to go to Utrecht. Yeah? but it won't help me to find a better way. Perhaps this is something that works very well. I can also say, hey, instead of looking at me going to Utrecht, I can also look at all the different parts. I can make a model of it. Yes, because if I go to Utrecht, then I'm going first to a crossing here and then to the next crossing. So I can look at the different components of my model, of my route network. I can look at the statistic for every road network. Perhaps on Monday morning, perhaps the freeway is always busy, or perhaps there's a crossing or a bridge that is always busy. So I can do statistics on all my components. And then I can do something, I can say something new about the whole network. Yes, because then perhaps I learn that I should avoid a certain road on a certain point in time. Yeah? So that it's called modeling. It's not so often modeling is more powerful, but sometimes it's very hard because you have to understand all these components. Yeah? So it's more work, but it's potentially more powerful. But what you do is that you need the statistics to come up with the with expressions about your components. And you have to know how long it takes to go all the pieces of the roadmap. And related to that is the following: is robustness, and I think that's a term that I haven't discussed yet. But so up to now, we always assumed that my parameters are given. Yes, like for this airline revenue management problem, I told you it's 0.5 probability. Actually, the biggest issue for an airline company is not coming up with the model as you programmed it, but it's coming up with the forecast. Yeah? And when is the demand high? And then I have to take into account the day of the week, holiday season, competition, etc., etc., etc. Yeah? So forecasting is one good example of the parameters that are needed by your model. And one very important thing is you ask yourself, how sensitive is my model to errors in my parameters? So it is actually very interesting, and I had some students doing that exactly for the model that you implemented. But it's an interesting question to ask yourself. Okay, suppose that I make a 10% error in my forecast. What are the consequences on my revenue? In statistics, we're used to saying, okay, this is my statistical accuracy. But what is the use of statistical accuracy? By itself, the end goal is in terms of your objective. And here your objective in revenue management is making as much money as possible from this flight. And that's the sole objective. So if you think about, are my parameters accurate enough, then you have to talk about robustness. What are the consequences of an error in my parameters? How sensitive is my model to changes in my parameters? And that's robust. Yes? And that depends on the model. Yeah? I cannot go into details of something that, of course, you can experiment, but it's important. So, and you also have to think, how do you deal with parameter uncertainty and with errors? Sometimes it's part of the model. For example, we've been talking about call center planning. There are many planning problems in practice where simply they have another step in that process to deal with the errors. In the call center, you do planning. You always make forecasting errors. A forecasting error of 5% is very normal. If you have 5% more traffic than you scheduled for, then you have a very bad service level in the call center. So what they typically do, they have enough flexibility to make sure that they can get more people if they get more calls than they expected. Then they simply send people home if there are less calls. And so they have the flexibility in their system. Of course, this you can make part of your optimization model, but then you get a much more complicated optimization model that you cannot perhaps solve as a whole. And so then you go back to the these hierarchical models where you solve one problem. So what you usually do is you do your statistics first and then your optimization. But again, there are certain approaches where this is integrated. And then it's at least technically very interesting. Yeah? So for example, you might say, okay, I know I make an error. Yes? I know I make on average a 5% error. So why not optimize taking into account that I make this 5% error? You can do that. So how to make sure that I have 80% service level, knowing that there is some variability in my arrival rates, yes, in my parameter. Yeah, that I do not need 12 people at 9 o'clock, but somewhere between 10 and 14. And then depending on the model that you have, on the optimization problem, whether or not you have perhaps flexible people, you can get different solutions. Yeah, but it makes a difference if you really makes a difference if you assume that that you have uncertainty in your model. Then you make different solutions. Then you come up with different solutions. Another way, which is there's a huge literature, is that they basically say, well, I know I can do certain things. I can just take, assume that life is deterministic. But actually, I know life is like this. Yeah? And then there's a whole branch of optimization, which is called robust programming, linear programming, robust programming, which basically says, okay, I cut off the corners, and this here is called my uncertainty set. And now I'm optimizing for the worst situation in here. Yeah? So within my uncertainty set, I assume some kind of a worst case, and that's part of my optimization. So it's optimization of an optimization. Yeah? So you minimize costs for the maximum nuisance, let's say. Yeah? And then leaving out really the very unlikely cases. Yeah? That's a branch of mathematics which is pretty big, which is called robust programming. Finally, there are situations where while optimizing, you can learn. Yeah, and that's perhaps the most interesting thing. Yeah, that's like every day you want to get out of this building, yes, because you want to go home. Or think about the next, I don't know, perhaps I'm just a nerd, but when I'm driving home on my bike, riding home from here to my, well, to my home, then of course there are different options. Yes, and sometimes I say, hey, perhaps it's faster this way. And then when I go there, I don't know, well, by now I know Amsterdam pretty well. Or perhaps you end up in places that you didn't know. So you can say, okay, I do the same thing as yesterday. I know it's pretty quick. But you can also say, no, let's try a right turn here. And perhaps I end up in a bad location where it takes much longer. Or perhaps I find a new way, which is much better. Yeah, so if you do that every day, yeah, then what you're basically doing is you're learning. Now, of course, you have to do this in a repetitive manner because then you can use it the next time. Yeah? So there's quite some theory, certainly in artificial intelligence, on learning. Yeah, and if people read about learning, and I have to say, I'm a mathematician, but well, I try in my research and in the people I work with to combine different things and to learn about also learn, but yet in another context, learn about new methods, also from other fields. But I do have to say that people from AI, they really are very good in terminology. So, and one of these nice terms that they found, that deep learning is, of course, a very nice term. And this is also one of these nice terms. Linear regression is a lousy term. By the way, the word regression, where that comes from, is even worse. It has to do with the fact that if you have an outlier, that after that you go towards the mean. That is very likely. Yes, and they call this regression to the mean, and that's why there's something like regression. But regression has a negative sound to it. Anyway, that's the way. This is one of these very nice terms: exploitation and exploration. Yeah, so if I'm driving home, then I can do two things. I can just take the road that I know, according to my current knowledge, is the fastest one, and then I'm doing exploitation. But I can also say, okay, I'm taking a different route, a street that I don't know yet. Perhaps it's likely that I will end up in a place which is not convenient or which takes longer. But if I do not invest now and then in knowing a shorter way, then I will never find a shorter way. Yeah, that's called exploration. Right? So, and the interesting thing is that you have to balance between these two. Let's think about an area where this slowly gets adapted is in medical research. Lots of over the last couple of years, lots of articles in the newspaper are about the fact that the traditional way of deciding whether medication is good or not is by doing randomized trials. Yes, that's by taking 1,000 patients here and 1,000 patients in the control group, and then waiting for years and years the outcomes here, the outcomes there, and then decide which one's best. Yes, standard statistical methods, very well described. Of course, there are lots of difficult issues with that, but that's one way. It is extremely costly, and nowadays, because with personalized medicine, there are lots of reasons why this doesn't work. Now, suppose completely different context. Suppose that you have this traditional medicine, yeah, and you know it works in 60% of the cases. And here you have this candidate for this new drug that you want to test. Yeah, then you have the same thing. You do not know what it does. Yes. So, do you give to a certain patient the old medication? Yeah, then you're just that's exploitation. That's something you know that works well. Or do you try something new? And if you try it, then you get an outcome, yes or no, and therefore you increase your knowledge on this outcome. Yeah? And then you're exploring, but perhaps in a better way. This is the way that nowadays more and more, and this is of course simplified, but this is more and more the way in which people are thinking about medical research nowadays. So then you have, here you know, because it has been given perhaps already thousands of times, you know pretty high certainty that that it works in 6% of the cases. But here, actually, you have a distribution on the success rate. So in different situations, you can also put it into a more economic framework. There are basically two approaches. Yeah, what I just described is more like a Bayesian approach. Yes, and this Bayesian approach fits very well in the, and then you hear all this, I'm talking about optimization, and deciding which drug to give to somebody is also optimization problem. Perhaps you want to maximize the number of healthy patients after a certain amount of time. That's an optimization problem. But all of a sudden there are Bayesian things coming. So what I want to do, and I think I have 2 more slides, and then we're going to do the break, and then we're going to talk about the cases. One is about a Bayesian approach, and another one is about Q-learning. Again, this is all about learning. So it's all, these are all extensions of this dynamic programming framework of last time. Yeah? So first is by dynamic programming framework. Yeah? Suppose you do not know everything. Yeah? Why? You do not know the success rate of a certain medication. Yeah, so you have partial information on, well, we'll see how this works, but actually on the transition probabilities. Because I give a certain person a drug, I don't know what the probability is that this person will get better. So I'm not sure about the transition probability. Yeah. Now I give this drug, and so I have certain information on this drug. I assume I have prior information. Then I give this drug, then I, yes or no, patient gets better. So then I have posterior information, and then I know better what this drug does. Yeah? Okay. And let me give you an example, and exactly this medicine that I just described. Suppose I do not know what this medicine does. Yeah? Now, let's assume, perhaps a bad approximation, you can come up with better approximation, that's the next question, but assume that my starting information is that I really don't know what the success probability of this drug is. Perhaps you have information, perhaps you tested it on animals, or perhaps you first had a group of well, I don't know, all kinds of ways to have prior information on it. But let's assume it's uniform. This is my information on the drug. Yeah? What I do here, and now I give this drug to a patient. Yeah? Then two things can happen. Either this patient is cured, or this patient, well, is not cured. Yeah? So I have a success or a failure. Now I can compute a posteriori distribution. Yeah? Of course, if there's a success, it cannot be the case that my success rate is 0. And it's more likely that my success rate, that the healing probability is here than there, because I had a success. Yeah? Actually, it looks like this, the new distribution. If it's failure, it's the other way around. Now, if this is now my knowledge, here, by the way, the probability of healing is 1/2, and here it is, I don't know exactly, I think 2/3, but of course this is bigger, so here I am perhaps more likely to give this medication to yet another patient. Yeah? And if it's then again a success, then it will look like that. If it's a failure, it will look like that, and that's the same as this, but it's a different order. And if 2 failures, it's this. Yeah? This here, now if you want to put this in a dynamic programming framework where you want to maximize the number of cured patients after a certain amount of time or some other objective, yes? Suppose every point in time you have to manage over T time units, every point in time. And you get a new patient, how to maximize the number of cured patients. Then again, the state should contain all the information that is needed. Now, a distribution is some function, so that's complicated. But the nice thing here is that actually this distribution here is characterized by 2 successes and 0 failures. So actually my state here, my state of the medication, so the state of my decision process is the number of successes and the number of failures. So that is my state of my decision process. Yeah? And these probabilities, you can determine them from these distributions. And actually, this is a well-known class of distributions. These are called the beta distributions. Yeah? So if you start with a uniform distribution, you draw from a uniform distribution, you compute the a posteriori distribution, and then you again draw from that distribution, and you compute, etc., etc. Then you stay within the class of beta distribution. And okay, and you can use this in such a way, and that is, well, again, Well, there's a theory related to that about so-called blended process. Let's not go into any more details because this might already be pretty confusing. The point I want to make is that you can introduce uncertainty in this market decision process, and you can learn about your process while using it, while executing it. And then, of course, this dynamic framework makes sense for learning, because learning is something where you do an experiment, you get the output, you get feedback, and you update your knowledge on the basis of your experiment, and then you do the next experiment. Yes? And with your whole objective is somehow to maximize some reward. Yeah? So you can, and this is one framework. So this would be a very mathematical framework in the sense that if you do this, you can really have, these are all exact calculations. So these are the distributions that you see, these beta distributions. Again, if you want to know, more about this, just look up beta distributions on the internet. You'll see these distributions. Again, the uniform distribution is the beta 1, 1. I don't know why it's not the beta 0, 0. Another way, yes. Yeah. That depends very much on the parameters that are involved. But that's the same thing with randomized trials. Of course, if you find a big difference, then you need less replications than when you have a smaller one. So this typically, what happens here is that after some time, and a good objective is to do some discounting in here, so that future rewards, future healed patients are a bit less important than the ones that you do right now, which makes sense. Perhaps there's yet another medication in a year. So perhaps, but you typically see that here, that after some point in time, you have so much certainty about a certain medication that it's better or not that you always go for that one. Yeah, so it adapts itself really to what you find. Now, in a randomized trial, what you usually do is you set up first your trial, and perhaps it's not big enough to get a significant difference, or perhaps it's too big, and after half of the trial, people say, okay, we should stop this trial because the results are so good. Yeah? So this here will automatically adapt itself to what happens. Yeah? So it is, I mean, as long as you agree on the objective, it's the optimal thing to do because it's optimization. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to wait until the outcome of the first one before you can start with the second one.
Of course, there are lots of practical things. One of the difficult things is that sometimes it takes years before you get the outcome. Of course, and there's a lot of statistics about that, about censoring, etc. Yeah, because perhaps you do an experiment right now, you do not even know what the outcomes will be. Yeah, so how to include that? Yeah, if it takes years for the medication to take effect, or if you look at how long people survive a certain disease, or the probability that you survive so many years. Of course, there are lots of. I'm not saying that this is the answer to everything. If you do this in practice, then typically these things, these delay effects, play an important role. Yeah. But it's also the challenge, perhaps, to include that and to include things like survival curves in this type of thing. These are indeed challenging. So there is, what you see nowadays, also research community working on these alternatives to randomized trials. Yes, and the framework in which that is done. Again, I don't want to overload you with terminology, but people do that in terms of bandage processes. And they call this even multi-armed bandit processes. And this has to do with slot machines, where you have to decide, do I play on that slot machine or do I play on that slot machine? And every slot machine has a certain state. And depending on your knowledge of which state, you play one slot machine or the other. There's, that's the framework in which people talk about this. This is a very simple slot machine. Yeah? It always gives you the same reward, but you don't know it. Yeah? So same in slot machine, if you go to a casino, then which machine do I play on? I suppose that you do not know the probability. Yeah, then you have to try a slot machine a couple of times to know its success probability. Yeah? So that is the terminology. I don't know if you like it. I think it was invented by mathematicians. This one, that's what people call it. Another situation where these type of things also play a role is like new product introduction. And suppose that you have to. Actually, I have a student at UV who has a part-time job at Ethos, which is, how do you say that in English? I'm sorry, drugstore. And Ethos is actually part of Albert Heijn, of Ahold. And so they have a hard time with new products. Yes, how much should I keep on stock for new products? Yeah, but you don't know the forecast. So you have to decide, okay, I take 10 or 100 items on stock, but you do not know how it will. And so you have to learn about the demands in the first weeks or months, and then adapt your stock levels. But if you have way too much stock in the beginning, then you might have the stock there for months and months, and then otherwise you might run out of stock and have lost sales. So similar, so then you have a prior distribution on this demand parameter, and then you have to think, okay, what do I learn about my early sales? So lots of problems where you combine these more statistical problems, optimization problems. The last thing I want to say about this, very short. Now this is actually really the example for this robot looking for an exit. Remember that if we have this value function that you all implemented, so you all know that very well. This value function, how did it look like? It was you had something like Vm plus 1x is something like maximization of all kinds of actions of Rxa plus sum over y, bxa, y, v and y. But now suppose that you do not know your transition. Suppose that you're that I'm like me cycling home. I do not know which state I end up if I take an unknown road. Yeah? So it's not sufficient to somehow. So when I want to make my decisions, I cannot make my decisions right now. If I have an approximation of my V's, then I still cannot make a decision because I do not know my P's and my R's. So therefore, people invented something called Q learning. So actually this thing, let's give it a separate name. Let's give it this name. And now you can do a recursion on these things. Yeah? And now what you're going to do is you're going to store these numbers in memory. And now if I get to a certain crossing, then I still have to do my exploitation thing. But if I have an approximation for my Q's, at least I know which one to choose. And you can also write down, I didn't write it down here, I just wrote down the definition of Q. But the Q what is it? It is R xa plus some y p xa y, and now this VNI is of course, it is itself a maximization over, let's call this A prime, of, well, and now you get actually Q n minus 1 y A prime. So now all of a sudden, we have a recursion of the Q's. And well, so what the disadvantage is that your state space gets bigger because you not only have to store something for every x, but also for every xa. But this is what they typically use. Let's say if a robot wants to learn the way out of a building, which is of course much sexier than me wanting to go home. Of course, so it's again AI people knowing the right terminology. And this is the starting point, approximating this cube of something which is called reinforcement learning, which again is about learning in this DP setting. And what you do here typically is you're walking through your network and you're seeing the connections in the road network or in the building, and on the way you update your value. Let's not go into too much details, but well, I hope you understand it. If you know the layout, then you can use standard dynamic programming. If you want to learn while walking, somehow you have to update your information while you do it. And therefore, well, you can use this. This is something they call this reinforcement learning. You use this new recursion on the queues, and then it's called Q-learning, which is basically an alternative to the standard. So this is all very brief, perhaps not very clear, but also to give you the idea how there are all these connections between statistics and machine learning, and how optimization, as I presented it, and what I presented is more, is really of course, the basic theory that I try to give it in all its broadness, not just combinatorics very deep, but a bit about linear optimization and graph problems, combinatorial optimization, a bit about stochastic optimization. Again, if you want to dive deeper, you can make connections with these other fields, and there are many links to perhaps more modern fields like machine learning and reinforcement. Okay, I want to stop here with the with this part. This part. So what I want to do next, there are two things that remain. I have listed. So you have submitted this question 4, these cases. I've listed here these actually 9 cases. Again, we don't have to discuss them for 50 minutes each. That's way too long. But I want to spend, let's say, on average 5 minutes on them. And then I want to finish by discussing what you should learn for the exam. But let's first have a 50-minute break, and then we start with these cases.
How are you? No, it's okay. Did you too much? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was good now because I did more.
Yeah. I'll Yeah, you know, same thing. Anybody? Right? We're good. I think we're good. I'm good. You're good. We're covered. That's the minute now. We can clean it up.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if it's alcohol. Okay.
Oké.
Die luxe hebben wij niet allemaal.
Oh yeah, soms ik heb wel
Yeah, that is the only thing where I will not fuck up. I'm sitting there.
Yeah, stress is bad. I don't like terms like burnout or things like that, but I'm afraid that sometimes they apply.
I think I'm really one step before burnout. No,
when you recognize that you don't have any anymore, even to do things that you know you can do. So it's clearly a sort of an exhaustion of your resources.
I'm just don't talk to you what you
Yeah. So
this blog is really.
okay, so
maybe it's also the way I want to do things.
I went to Berlin last week again and came back Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
And yesterday the whole day at home in the bed, even really, the breathing was even.
I recognize it. Yes.
And then the eyes didn't work.
Yeah. Then afterwards I say, oh, could I waste a day if I was scared? But then I say, but I needed it, please.
And also you can't do anything anyway.
So I'm really, I cannot say I'm happy to hear that also other people have the same job. I'm not happy. But I mean, knowing that this is common helps to accept it. Yeah. But it's also,
And this blog, you the same. We didn't take this blog this year, so we should really succeed this year. We can't postpone again to the next year this blog.
Yeah, and the fact that I had the mindset that this is going to be limited to this year, this experience. Then I had a year long to accept it to take 1 year more. But then I realized that there must be something in my subconscious that still wanted it to finish now. So I'm not at least to accept that to do 1 year more. It makes
And
me.
also it's a more clarification of another year.
Yeah. If
All our colleagues, they are finished.
you could say, okay, it's the last time.
Let's come now, it's the end. Yeah. I
don't know why, I didn't either, but I realized that it's playing against the.
It's not a full year to go, but still it's like a year to go.
because indeed it will be lighter, but the tension and the worries will stay there.
And there are the problems also.
Yeah.
And the worry too.
It will be lighter in effort, but the same in tension.
Why have I ever wanted to?
Well, I have to say that I'm happy. I mean, I got completely different things than I expected, but in the end, I'm happy about the result. Not happy about the way it is going, but happy about the result.
You want beginning of music?
whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It was basically good weather.
It's good weather, yes, to be outside, yeah. Yeah, so good day.
Right. Ah, yeah. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. And I think we got everything arranged right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Is that not clear? Then you should perhaps send me an email if it's not clear. Yeah, then I will answer it. Yeah. So now I don't. Then I have to look it up.
Yeah. I will.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, you're welcome. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So then, yeah. Okay. Did you send me an email about it? No, please do so. Yeah, and then I can see with Chantal and then because it's not right now. Okay. So just send me.
It's actually chill. What else is riding? People running, you go and riding. But I could be next to thank you for the assignment. I love the note. Okay.
Yeah.
These guys only did pieces. Really like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're gonna work out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is also. Yeah. Next week,
yeah, I think destructive and predictive is very much often used the same model. It depends a bit on what model you use, but that's very often the case. Then the question is that is it worthwhile to really separate each step or to do your parameter estimation and run your model? And it really has to do with things like robustness. Yeah, is how sensitive it doesn't make sense that I do some learning, how sensitive is my error
No, I had a guy
just first of June.
from the of that in the detail, so
we skip. For what? No.
South Coast.
Yeah.
That's really like
We have artists, we have our own.
Based on
These are really feminine.
We were talking about
Friday night.
when was it?
8 is the Friday, 9 is the Saturday.
Okay.
yeah.
and try to see how can we
So we're looking for
optimize this
engineers.
our manufacturing
And the culture is pretty international.
and we have kind of plan for this particular Germany.
One of the process on top of the
Members of
was doing good for
You never know.
Yeah, we
That's weird, yeah, that's weird. But if he does like a answer session, question and answer session, maybe that, but whatever. So you're studying anyway. This class is two. Yes, I think we have answers to them. 12 classes, 2016, 2017, I don't know. So, yeah, he posted, yeah.
make it more forecast.
Germany.
That's what we are doing. Do you know anything about forecast here?
Also,
You know how we can be forecast art? But we have
Yeah.
for example, we have something called we call it files.
That's a 10. The drinks is 68. It actually could be really
I can do it today now.
But you're familiar with the stuff this one? You're familiar with this?
more than 10 years ago. And you?
No, I'm really afraid of it, to be honest. Because I don't know. Give some questions.
I did some things on books.
Yeah, I really need to study and kind of find the way to structure it so that I can reuse it.
I mean, they
The answers? Then I hope you can provide us answers. So everybody
Very possible. That sounds exactly like something you say. Things like you should have some forecast. I don't know what depends on the now below 5 units and all I think the guy is good. See a lag. Well, basically, I think. Okay. Everybody filled in this one? Okay, a couple of cases. So as I said, I have 9 cases. So I try to copy them on one sheet. Some of them get really small because some of you gave lots of details. And some of them are very clear. Some of them I still didn't fully understand. But please, those of you who submitted them, please add anything if you want. So this is actually an interesting one. Because a couple of months ago, a neurosurgeon at the VU Medical Center came to me with exactly the same issue. So they have a schedule for the surgeons, and believe it or not, there's one of these surgeons. So that's a neurosurgeon. Well, I don't know if you have any idea of the salary of a professor, but the salary of a neurosurgeon, I think you should multiply it at least by 2. And this guy was doing the schedule for him and his colleagues in Excel. So that's what he was doing. Actually, they have in this hospital, they have some tool for scheduling nurses. But that didn't work well actually with the supplier of this software. We had quite a number of conversations, and because I know some of the people in the management, I got to sit to get some people on the table who really knew this tool. But still, this wasn't really the answer to things. And what his problem was, for example, you had different shifts, like the weekend shift and the Monday shift. So these neurosurgeons, after surgery, they had to be there in case of any problem. So there should always be one neurosurgeon at duty. And so they had different duties, like a day duty and a night duty and a weekend duty. And then if you were on duty on Christmas in 1 year, then you shouldn't be on duty on the next year. And there should be some compensation for that. So. And that's, unless I misunderstand this problem, that's your problem. Yeah. So what we did with this, together with this neurosurgeon, we looked into different software tools. And although, well, it's hard to go to look for the full market, but we didn't really find something. Finally, in the end, so we had these discussions with the supplier of this tool, and I think in the end they could supply something. But by that time, we solved it in Excel. And once this neurosurgeon found had his solution, then he wasn't interested in spending another minute in it. So then the whole project kind of stopped as soon as he got a good solution. But we ended up doing it in Excel. There were two important things. There were and that is often in optimization problems, there were soft constraints and there were hard constraints. And soft constraints, you have to think of, if you had one weekend, then you should do the next weekend. And you can, if it's really necessary, you do need to stick to them. And hard constraints are overlapping shifts that two people cannot really do, or certain regulations that told you, okay, if you do this shift, then you're not allowed to do it. The problem was that this person in his Excel, he had lots of if statements. And he tried to use the solver. He tried to use, actually, he had already installed the open solver. So, of course, this guy, I mean, well, he was far from stupid, but he lacked the background that you have by now. So, he did this, so he did some smart things, but he tried to run the solver, and you completely understand what happened. He got all these complaints from the solver that he had all these nonlinear things in it. So actually, what I did, I spent a couple of hours with him, explaining him how he could linearize everything. And when he did that, and he really had an impressive Excel sheet. When he did that, he made a linear. And then he got great solutions. And he was very it's almost too nice to be true, but it's really what happened. So that's what he's doing. When I started this project, I hoped actually that we could come up with some robust solution and I knew other specialties in the hospital were also interested in, and we talked to people like the AMC. As you know, there's an alliance between QMC and AMC. So I thought, hey, perhaps we could really do something and come up with some sustainable solution. But again, as soon as he found a way to linearize, he learned about so linear IOO problems. And as soon as he understood it, and he did it fully himself in his Excel sheet, so he got rid of this segment, replaced it by binary variables, got everything running, and then that's where the whole project ended. Yes. Good question. So the hard constraints, these are really the constraints in your in the standard formulation. So these are the constraints that you say I don't know, the y of shift A, and which is in 0, 1, and you have a y of shift B. Yes, also in 0, 1. Yeah, they should be together be smaller than 1. Yeah, so either this one occurs, that one occurs, but not together. This type of constraint. Yeah? But the soft constraints, they go in the objective. Yeah. So, so things that can happen, but you don't want to have, you put them in the objective. And there's also a way, I mean, you can put basically any constraint, you can turn it into an objective. Because if I have x smaller than 3, that's of course a hard constraint. But suppose that somehow my solutions are such that this never occurs, then I can always turn it into something like this. And so now my hard constraint is turned into a soft constraint. Yeah, so I'll try to make x smaller than 3, but or perhaps I should put a minus here. But if x is 4, then I can make y 1. Well, but I prefer it to be 0. So I can turn any hard constraint into a soft constraint. And sometimes that is very useful. Suppose that you are you're doing this and you say, I want to have a doctor every day on duty. But suppose you do not have enough doctors. Then this problem, this optimizational problem will stop and say there's no solution possible. Perhaps because there are some conflicting objectives that, or just not enough resources that you cannot fulfill your schedule. Yeah, that's of course not what you want, because then it just tells you, hey, I cannot find a solution, and then you do not know why it doesn't find a solution. But on the other hand, if you turn your hard constraints into soft constraints, then it tells you here or there, I really have a problem. Then there is some decision variable that becomes very big. And same with, suppose, for example, that this is your service level. Yeah, I want to minimize. Think about this agent scheduling. I want to minimize. I'm taking too much time, but I want to minimize something like this. Yeah? I have my service level, which depends on my shifts, and I want to minimize the cost on my shifts. Now, suppose simply I do not have enough resources because I have certain constraints on my x's to satisfy this. Yeah, then it gives an error message. You can also say, I want to minimize this plus some big number y, and then I put y. Then this is always satisfied, and I can see the gap between the service level that I can reach and that I have reached because of the y. Yeah, here it should be a plus, of course, because I reversed. Yeah, suppose that the best service level I can do is 75%, then this becomes 5%, and then I get a huge penalty turn. Yeah, so that's turning hard constraints into soft constraints. It's always possible, especially when you make software. You don't want your software to crash. You want it to give always an answer, but to explain you why there's an issue. Yes, but apart from that, this problem typically can be made, as far as I have encountered, as long as it's similar to one I have, you can make it linear, and then there's also software that should be able to do it, but it's not easy. So in the Video Medical Center, again, they have software for scheduling nurses, and it was quite a hassle. You need a lot of insights into the software to have it running also. And I think in the end they managed, by the time the neurosurgeon has found the solution in Excel. And, yeah. So if you want more details about this, I can perhaps. If this really is an issue at the hospital you're working, you might want to perhaps get in contact with this neurosurgeon. Just send me an email if you understand it. Okay. Next problem. So this is about an insurance. Who's Johan? This is about an insurance company. On a year, there's an interesting problem. On a yearly basis, the department receives a number of claims. Yeah? So people who say, hey, something broken, or I needed to go to the doctor, or I lost my photo camera is stolen on holidays, whatever. Many of these are small, and of course you cannot go into so this is about checking whether they are fraudulent, right? Yeah. And you have here percentages which are fraudulent. Okay, I don't know. I assume that these are fake numbers. Yeah, because this was typically one of which I thought, well.
Average is 10%, and real fraud cases is like 2%.
Okay, yeah, okay. that sounds better. Otherwise, you can better invest more money in it. Yeah. Of course, there are lots of different optimization problems. Here you say, so I guess that you say I have so many hours of work. So,
in which case we need to spend most of our time.
Yeah, yeah. And there is a difference in, so what I didn't get here, so what do you mean 10% of all claims? Because these numbers add up to 110. Okay, that's okay. Okay. And some of them are working in part-time or some of them are better? Oh, okay, okay. But because their income, who cares about it? They have the same. They have the same skills. Yeah. And so then I would say if you want to, I don't know what you get. There's still some information missing unless I don't. So what do you get out of it? So on a claim which is fraudulent, you don't have to pay it? Yeah, so perhaps, okay, so then it's simply, then you need to know what is the, if you have two categories, then you have to know what is the average amount that you don't have to claim, and perhaps it's not said that it's the average amount above 5,000 or below 5,000, because it might be that it's typically in the higher region there's more fraud or anything, so you still have to get some numbers on the table. I would say that you can make, you can divide the revenue by the number of hours, and then you simply do something greedy and start by these, by all these cases. However, you might want to do a certain percentage of both types of claims. Otherwise, people know, okay, it's never get checked. I don't know if this is some learning of your customers in here, that they can submit anything they want and they never hear something back about it. Yeah. So it's like, you know, there's no speed control at the highway, then you all drive like idiots. So you want to, I don't know if this is really a case, if this plays a role, but if I see this, then I would say, okay, if they are, for example, on average 10,000 and they are on average, I don't know, 2,000, yes, then 10,000, then you can say, okay, what is the revenue per hour spent on these claims? And then I would say, okay, the highest revenue, you start with them. So I don't know what, here it says, on average 20,000. So if it is indeed the case that not the claim size, but the fraud is 20,000, it might be that the fraud is more within the higher case or in the low case. Then here, that's an investment of 2,000 euros per hour. That's, and then that's 20%. 20% times. So it is. Now let's do the exercise. So it's 20% of 20K. 20K, and so that's the expected revenue per case, and then you spend 10 hours on this. So what is it? 400? So that's 400 euro per hour. I would hire some more people, I think. But of course, these cases, these numbers are not correct. And the other one is, what is it? 80% of 2,500, and then divided by, I don't know what this is, but you can fill up people first with the highest one of these two, and then if you have more people, if you can handle all the cases, then you start with them. But again, perhaps you want to have a certain percentage of these cases. You've only to know these percentages because you have to estimate it. Yeah. But Perhaps it's even more important to say, okay, how many does it make sense to hire more employees? And I can imagine that employees have different skills. that also determines their revenue. And you might want to say, okay, this person is specialized in travel insurance. But it definitely makes sense to do this type of exercise. And there are lots of other things you can do. And you can do some machine learning methods to see which claims are more likely to be fraudulent. You can learn which cases should I look into. Right? So I know of in this type of area there are lots of machine learning applications. So credit and credit scoring and scoring. Okay, next case. Mining and metals, and lots of problems here. Lots of optimization problems. Who is Damir? That's you. These are, some of these are definitely, I don't know exactly, but I know there's a lot of optimization. I know that at the first customer of Ortec, if I'm not mistaken, who works for Ortec here in this? Okay. They started working for Shell, and they still have a large oil and gas operation. They have, I think, even offices in Houston and Calgary, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, one of the person who opened the office in Calgary was one of our alumni and I at Business Analytics. So I know some of these problems, but and so there are lots of in these refinery problems. There are lots of everything in oil and gas. There's of course lots of optimization problems. Long-term strategy optimization of the refinery business. Yeah. At some point, I had some student working on trying to make an optimization model for a refinery. Again, there were some number of nonlinear constraints in it. She was doing an internship indeed at Ortec. Midterm optimization, I think this was more it resolves with. PIMS, what is?
It's a production integration management system.
Okay.
It's American.
It's an American system. Yeah. This typically is also, okay, you can solve it linear optimization, development plans. Yeah. So I don't know exactly which techniques are used. I know that Shell also used some scenario analysis to do optimization and simulation, long-term simulation, and they're known for that.
It's difficulties because of it's dynamic and a lot of subsurface characteristics that are changing every month, maybe every week, and you need something
to reschedule very often.
And, to reschedule your workload and your facilities. It's dynamic.
Yeah. So I agree. I don't know if you should go through all the things, but I think there are indeed many opportunities, and the amount of money, of course, and the resources are very expensive. So it really makes sense to do these optimizations. So fleet optimization, also in I think about also airlines, how they do the crew optimization. These are typical examples where people use large-scale optimization. So again, a lot of them going back to the first three lectures, although there are lots of things which are uncertain here. And then again, what people often do is they use some average and then perhaps reschedule every time new information comes in. Investment industry. We advise clients to okay, there are two cases, this one and if I'm not mistaken, the next one, which has to do with investments. So here you have an investment portfolio or a basket. And then, of course, here interesting, remember what you always should do is think in decision variables, objective, and constraint framework. And here, the objective is specified in more details. The optimal portfolio can mean any of a couple of things. So you can do the highest expected potential return, then you're just maximizing your expected revenue. But that might mean that you take a lot of risk. Yes, that the distribution of your revenue is there's a lot of variability. So you can also say, I want something else. And then you're playing a bit as we did here with what are the constraints and what is the objective. And this is a very interesting one. You say, I want a certain minimum, I guess, expected return, but I want to achieve this with the lowest variability. Yeah? So then you say, I want to minimize my variability given a certain return. Yeah? So now all of a sudden, this return goes into a constraint, and now your variability goes into the objective. Yeah? So there are different choices, and there are different functions. And there are things like, well, there are specific objective functions also developed for the financial area, I want to call it. But, yeah, and then, well, some extra thing, an extra constraint, the maximum loss does not exceed a certain specific threshold. So there are different things here possible. Somehow variability comes in. If you define variability, depends a bit on how you do it, but very often that involves squares, so it won't be linear. Specific constraints on the type of products that can be selected with specific actions. Yeah, and so you can add additional constraints. Optimize the portfolio given all these constraints based on multiple objectives for statistics. Yeah, so these are, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with the whole financial sector, so I don't know to which there must be, or I know that lots of models are used for this. Of course, there are well-known models used for the valuation of all kinds of assets, but for this portfolio optimization, people must definitely use also optimization. But I'm not very familiar with it. But I think that if you put these constraints here, that you can already think of how you might want to do it. I don't know who submitted this. Does somebody want to add anything?
No, I think it's very clear.
Okay. Okay.
This is in the first one of the previous slide. The highest potential return, variability, a constraint or irrelevant? In the second one is clearly an objective, but in the first one, is it a...
Here is the objective, the optimal highest potential return. That is the objective here.
Yes, but the variability in that case is...
In here, so this is another one.
Yeah.
Here you say, I want to minimize my variability given a minimal return. So here the constraint is on the return and the variability is on the objective. But you do not simply want the lowest variability. You want to make sure that you have, I don't know, a 2% return.
Well, in the first one, I don't care about variability.
Here, apparently, you don't care about variability. Yeah, so that's like a long-term strategy, and you don't care about variability.
Thank you.
So I try to understand this, but perhaps so warranty deferral calculation. Yeah, can you explain?
Yeah, well, this is probably I just put bullet points, but it's more like I associated more forecast calculation. So when we sell a product, there is a warranty coming with the product, but we don't know when this is going to fail.
Yeah.
So when we recognize the cost and how to estimate this cost in the future.
Okay. Okay.
So for some products, for the old products that we have a line for that, we have a historical data that we more or less can assess that.
Yeah.
For others, it's just a probability that we have for the new products. yeah, it's just forecast calculation.
So this is a forecast calculation of new projects of how their failure rate will be.
Yeah.
That's basically what you do.
With the variation of the failure rate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it looks a bit like this estimation of the demand for new projects of what you do, what you do not know yet. So
yeah.
Yeah. So this is indeed more a statistical problem but I understand that this is. And what do you mean by warranty deferral calculation?
Well, this is more financial thing. So because first we sell the product, so we have the money, but we need to hold it until.
You have to make a reservation for warranties.
For future, if they fail.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a combination of financial.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So this is indeed more in the forecasting area, but I understand the relevance of the problem also when you have to put that in your financial statement.
Yeah.
That you reserved so much money for warranties. This was the other one. Let's go to the next one. Remco. Hi. Credit risk. Yeah, this was one of the. So credit risk. So if a customer defaults on the loan, cannot pay back, and you have to decide on applications to accept and to reject. Of course, you have an estimation of the risk, can be high or low, and you have to lay your level somewhere. Yeah? And that, of course, has everything to do with maximizing. Well, there are different things here. You have enough money to accept all loans that are offered?
No. Maybe, but you probably will have some sort of risk appetite.
Okay.
Then you should say that certain risks you simply do not want to run.
Yeah. Because there might also be a level at which you say this is not profitable anymore. And so you have a level at which you say this is not profitable anymore, but just above that it's profitable, but the risk is really high. Can I say it that way?
There could be, or you accept a low percentage of requests. Your profit will be lower than if you take some more risk. But there is a trade-off between the cost of risk and the revenue of the user. If you want to maximize risk,
you maximize profit, yeah?
You have to balance the cost of the risk and the revenue of the deals that you're looking for.
Yeah, but for me, within the profit, your risk is already accounted for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your profit, it is something like what are your revenues when the customer pays back times your loss when there's a default. Yeah.
So the problem is that you accept an application.
Yeah.
And you establish the riskiness of the customer.
Yeah.
But the default will happen in the future.
Sure.
So you're unsure about the probability that happens.
Yeah. But that has everything to do. I mean, so like in the other financial application, there you have the expected profit, and you have the variability of it, and somehow you have to combine the profit and the variability. Perhaps your and somehow you have to add it over your full portfolio of loans that you have, right?
No, in the scorecard,
Yeah.
there are like buckets. For example, there is a score between 100 and 110,
Yeah.
110 and 120,
Yeah.
and there is a probability of default measured with this scores. And then you find the cutoff.
Yeah.
Like after this cutoff, like if the score is lower than this cutoff, you directly reject all the customers. But if it is higher than the cutoff, you take the risk of this probability default, and also you know your profits from the accepted customers.
But the question is, what is the optimal cutoff level?
Yeah, this is very related with the risk appetite, of course. And this is also related with, let's say, the probability of default for the risk bucket. Let's say you say by cutoff is 150 and lower than 150, I will directly reject. So what's the difference between the probability of default, how many of those customers will default, so how much money you will lose, and also how much profit you will make between these different risk buckets. So you compare this.
Yeah.
So am I willing to take the risk of one more bucket number of defaulted customers, but I will earn that money by accepting those customers. So this is how you're deciding about the cutoff.
Yeah. Just a point I want to make is that to decide on this cutoff, you have somehow to take the full variability of the portfolio into account. So you have to make a calculation over the different buckets, and then of course there are lots of financial regulations that how you should do that, because you have a certain risk portfolio. Right? But I mean, this goes pretty deep into these financial models. This, if I remember well, that's yours.
I don't know if it really can be an optimization problem, but it can be more like operations management or the shortest path.
Yeah. So but I thought this is like a project. Things. This is like different activities that have to be undertaken. To do this modeling.
So there is like I try to very simply step by step into all the processes. Like how we start with the model development. So how many days it takes for each task. At the end of the period, let's say, when we send the tech, let's say we develop the model with a certain period of the data. Let's say until 2018. We use the data, and all this process is taking almost like 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And in the end, when we get the model approval, the model is already old.
Well, yeah. How to make it shorter?
Yeah.
I don't know. I to understand the business, but it's a linear process, or can you do certain tasks in parallel?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. From A to the C to the B at the same time.
Yeah.
They can run in parallel, then you meet at D.
Yeah, so then it becomes project planning. Let's see how we can do it. Okay, continue. I have two more. When I worked at a major bank, that's you?
Yeah, for the sake of time, it was not fun. I thought it was interesting.
It's about, I try to understand it. It's about desks.
Yeah, we got less desks. So how we resolved that initially was by saying that we have more people working.
Okay, and then you got, now I understand. Then you got more desks.
So everybody still could keep their desk.
Okay. And now it becomes something like, how do you minimize the distance to everybody's own desk?
Well, what happens is that obviously people want to have their own desk.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's not optimal from the company's point of view.
Especially lots of empty desks.
Half empty during the day. Now, part of the whole flex work is that people get in contact with departments that they never speak to anyway. But so people want to be close to their department. So what you need to optimize is the goal is the minimum amount of desks, whereby people are still able, at most times, to sit close to their colleagues.
Yeah.
So telling people, yeah, we have a desk available at the other end of the office.
Yeah.
It's not a solution and leads to.
But it starts with an assignment problem. So given that these people are present, where should they sit so that they are sitting close to each other?
Yeah, but that already happens because you have your plan. Because the starting phase is everybody has their own desk.
Okay.
So initially the desks are seated.
Yeah, but now there are more people because there are
now
not
we have to
desks.
take away desks. Because we're closing down offices everywhere, but not all the people can get fired.
Yeah.
Takes some time. Bridge the gap. Yeah, ultimately I gave up my desk.
Anyway, somehow you have to define what means this distance here. So you have to define the distance between desks. If this is my desk and tomorrow I'm sitting there, so how close am I to my own desk somehow? Or is it just a percentage of people sitting at their own desk? Or you have to think about something like that. When are people satisfied?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah. People were able to sit down close to their immediate, so you have to somehow quantify close to.
Yeah.
And so then you have to say, okay, the distance is so much and this is acceptable.
You can the hours in a week that people are.
Yeah, but you have to do a lot of forecasting because on Friday nobody's there, on Thursday everybody's in the office, and lots of things to do. Yeah, but interesting problem. And people can really get upset about it. Okay, this is, I think, the last one. Who is Alexis? Hi. Yeah, this is actually a very interesting problem, if I understand it well. At some point, it never continued, but at some point, perhaps there's a similar problem. Did I say something? Yeah, they're all hard, of course. I tried to say something positive. But at some point, I talked to a law office. And actually, they were specialized in some type of law, but depending on their workload, sometimes they had some hours left over, and then they wanted to do other types of cases. But then, of course, they should offer it at another price. But they should only do this if there weren't these high-paying projects going on. So actually, they needed a forecasting model to predict the number of cases in which they were specialized, for which they could charge their 300 or 400 euros an hour, and then they could do some other cases. And the remainder, instead of doing nothing, they could do other cases. Is that similar too?
It's quite similar because when I already started, like I say, I'm doing priorities, but there's the bread and butter business for a company doing assignments for clients, and that's like people working clients, so that's not only the most exciting work to be doing. And so, but it's also best paid. So you tend to accept the banking assignments, but also you want to have to pay for some of the more interesting ones, but they're also less well paid basically. So you have to sort of balance between getting the revenue from your typical financial client, but also maybe doing a few things that's slightly less attractive rates. But
yeah, you can add a constraint like you should do it in at least 20% these type of cases. Yeah. So that these are. Yeah, lots of interesting things. Okay, this was the final case. One more thing, that is what to bring and what to learn for that. So the Excel is in 2 weeks' time. If you have any questions, I mean, we could schedule something like a question hour, but my experience is that you're probably all connected, so I would say that's not necessary. But if you have any questions, I'm willing to schedule a question hour if you want, but that would mean that you would have to come here. That's not the best idea. If you have questions, you can send Chantal or me an email. Yeah, but my experience is that there won't be that many questions, and probably you're already working together or in a WhatsApp group or whatever. So you probably solve it, lots of things among yourself. What to learn? This is important. All the information is in the slides 1 up to 6. Yeah, the lecture notes are background information. Yeah, but everything I will ask will be in the first 6 sets of lecture slides. Yeah? So if you know that, then you're okay. What to bring? Sure.
In the slides 1 and 6, for example, when you give us an assignment, we didn't solve all the problems. Are we responsible for the ones that we submitted an assignment? But
of course, I won't ask any of the assignments, but all the assignments are examples of things you can do with the material in the slides.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, in one of the weeks, there were like a couple of questions, for example, transportation questions, some other type, but we...
I didn't ask them all to you.
Yes.
Yeah, but these are examples. Of course, the assignments are typically things that you do at home, which you can do with the computer, which are not representative for exam questions, but the assignments, certainly, the 8 parts are always questions that you can do with the material that is in that week. Yeah. So also, sometimes I made a choice. Like last week, there was a problem about inventory control, I think, and airline revenue management. I could have also asked the other one, and you should be able to do that. What to bring? Of course, you can bring a pen, pencil, calculator, everything. Something, no books or written paper. What you are allowed to do, and I will be the one sitting there in 2 weeks' time. You can take your own notes to the exams.
And if they're typed in Word?
No, well, please do it handwritten. Then I can, okay. If you type them in Word and it's your own handwritten, if you did it yourself,
so
I'll go back.
But
it's yeah. Written, printed. I'm sorry. I meant to say printed.
So including Word or including things.
If you do it yourself, it's fine. But so I don't want you to take the handouts or the lecture notes. Yes, but if you want to take your own notes, if you make your own summary, I'm fine if you bring that. Yeah. So I don't. Yeah. So if you want to write down, of course, I hope that everybody brings your own stuff. Of course, you can do lots of things with that. That's up to you. But in principle, the idea is that you can bring your own summary to the exam. Yeah.
Not the slides.
Not the slides. Not the slides. Because it's an exam, right?
Yeah, but there are too many slides here to memorize where is the related topic. We should have studied those slides. So it's, I think, relevant to read the slides.
I mean, you can, anything that you want to remember on the slides, you can put it on paper and bring it. That was last year's exam. Yeah. So that has been changed.
So 2 handwritten double-sided?
Yeah. I mean, the idea is more. Yeah. I mean, do you want more? That's fine with me as well.
Sorry, like it's a cheat sheet, or we can bring our notes?
It's your own cheat sheet.
Just one A4 paper.
You can bring your own notes.
No, okay, not necessarily cheat sheet. Okay. Oh, like bunch of notes.
Yeah, whatever you
Okay.
want. I don't know what is. It depends on your definition of cheat sheet. Yeah. So what? I mean, I think that if you have two sheets of, but you can write as small as you want, so that makes it. But I mean, so let's set a limit to it. So 2 sheets, 2 A4s. Huh? Who thinks that? I mean, if it's 2 or 4, I don't know. If you want it 4, you want it. You can write down anything you want, or anything. Anyway, you can write it. Of course, this is to help you avoid. I mean, usually on an exam you cannot bring anything, so this helps you write down anything. Yeah, but still good. Yeah, it depends on the exam.
Sorry again for the clarity. They can be even written with a computer and printed. I mean,
If you write it yourself and you print it, as long as it's not copied off then I'm fine with that. Yeah, but there probably will be some mathematical formulas, so perhaps you're more at ease if you. But that's up to you. So I accept also, but I don't want you to bring the lecture notes, otherwise. Well, I know how I would do it. I wouldn't do anything and just bring my lecture notes. Yeah, and I hope that you. I'm a better turn. Okay. I hope that's yes.
Lots of limits still apply, or no limit those?
So we decided on 4 handwritten A4 slides. Yes?
Could you please advise resources with exercises so we can do? Resources, I mean books or whether possibly solved exercises. So we can check out if we are aligned with publish a few.
I mean, I added a few exercises to the lecture notes that I put online, and I tried to add every time the answer to it so that you can check it. And then there are these books, so I mentioned the book by Winston, I think but I don't know if there are any answers. As far as I know, there are no answers. Usually, it's also a good habit of checking your answers, trying to understand yourself. It's a good answer. Because if you get really negative number or not a solution,
sometimes it's plausible but wrong. So it's okay to be sure that.
That can happen, but I would say that is really exceptional. Usually it's really not. Okay, see you in 2 weeks' time, and good luck with preparing the exam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then I don't know how the picture is that because it's on the box. That's another question. He said so, right?
Yeah, sorry, man. I didn't know you were in the group. I didn't even read it. I was like, first one to say that you would.
Because someone asked about exercise, you can check the cost of it.
I don't think I'm like the first page, man. It's like a simple thing.
En ik heb steeds niet meer flush.
Mensen binnen